Hey everybody. Let's see, getting familiar with this stage. So yeah, my talk is about kind of the navigating the golden age of gaming and kind of the rise of super studios and live content publishers. One or two housekeeping items I wanted to kind of cover quickly. I'm not here. I'm not a paid speaker. I'm not here to promote my company. The reason I'm here is that I love mobile games. I love the mobile games industry. I've been in the gaming industry my whole life, and I've had a wonderful career, and it's taken great care of me. So I wanted to give something back. The second reason I'm here is because I love Romania, and I'm not just one of those speakers who's saying, "Oh, I love Romania because I'm here," and I just have to say it. You'll hear throughout the talk that I've actually spent a lot of time here, and Romania has helped my career, and I want to obviously give a lot back to the folks here. My sort of experience with Romania started with Mihai Pohantu, who's over there somewhere, and I know he's our next speaker. When we were at Jamdat together, he sort of exposed his excitement for Romania and his belief that he could bring development and QA and studio to Romania, and he asked me, "Have you ever been there?" And I was like, "No, I've never been to Romania. I've heard of it, but I've never been there." And he's like, "Dude, it's amazing. You got to go." So I was like, all right, we'll get on a plane and we'll go out there. So he brought me here, and that was maybe 2005 or 2006, so over a decade ago. And through his inspiration and through his passion, we built a big studio structure here, which is still here today, the EA Mobile Romania team, and learned a lot. So as much as they learn from us, we learn from them. And I was super inspired when they asked me to come back out here. I was actually here just about a month ago. We were working with those folks, and they said, "Can you come back out and talk and be part of this?" And I was like, "Absolutely, I'd love that." So I'll talk a little bit about me and my history, so you have context. Context is everything. So I figured I'd talk a little bit about kind of where I'm from and how I think about things and what's worked for me and what hasn't worked for me, and places I've made horrible mistakes that have failed and places that have been successful and that have worked well for me. Then you'll hear that kind of I'm an optimist. I'm always a believer that the future is better. So we'll talk about the golden age of gaming and why that's today and why it's going to keep getting better. I'll talk a little bit about what's working out there in the industry. I've been fortunate enough to see inside lots of companies. I'm an advisor for 4 or 5 companies, and I've been at big companies like EA and Zynga, and then starting my own company. So I've got interesting context, and I've seen from lots of other companies on what's working and what's not. So I'll share that with you today. Maybe there's something you can take away from that. Then I'll bring some sort of battle-tested frameworks, things that I've used, and I still use to this day, and expose that. I know a lot of speakers come up and they're kind of cagey and they don't want to share. The nice thing about not being at these big companies anymore is I can be very honest about the things that I use today in a small company, my own personal company. And then we'll open up for thoughts and QA. I love QA, so I hope you guys think about questions throughout this and yell some out. I'm a big fan of questions more than I am typically doing these kind of big talks. So a little bit about me. I'm not afraid to fail. I try lots of things. I make lots of mistakes. This is an innovative, fast-moving business. I started out in this business back in the late 80s. My first game job was in 1988, so been doing this a long time. And if I hadn't kept evolving and keep trying, keep learning, I'd still be doing Philips CDI games, which is what I started in back in 1988. And so you've always got to be learning. You've always got to be pushing because the industry is going to just run right by you if you don't. So me being in my mid-late 40s, I'm still hoping that I can keep up with all you young folks because I'm always trying to learn, sharing information and gathering information from you as well. I take the time. I'm an advisor for the School of University of Southern California in Los Angeles, and I do that because I want to learn from what the students are doing, where the research is going, and what young people are seeing and the kind of tools that they're using. And lastly, this idea that the first step's always the hardest. A lot of times, at least for me, once I get going, even a talk like this, you're nervous when you first get up here, but once you start going and you sort of put one foot in front of the other, you eventually get to where you want to go. And a lot of my career has been that, just sort of forcing myself to take that first step, and once you take that first step, the subsequent steps just get easier and easier, and you make your way. The guy that I used to work with at Zynga, Curtis Lee, started a company called Lux, and they're kind of like an Uber, but for parking and valet. And they recently just sold to Volvo, I think, this last week. And he was one of those people who used to say that all the time. He's like, "It's crazy that I'm CEO of this company, I'm starting this company, but the first step was the hardest, and every step he went, he just sort of found his way, and just recently exited his company." So if there's something there you can really take away, that first step is the hardest, but it makes a lot of sense. So talk about some of my first steps. I was in the console industry before I joined mobile in sort of the late 90s, and I joined mobile in 2000 when I went to Jamdat, and that's what the industry looked like back then, and people thought I was crazy for joining the mobile industry back in those days. And the reason I did was sort of twofold. I love the mobile games industry. I love the games industry, sorry, just games in general. I was doing console games at the time. But I also liked being out with my friends and my family and out in the world and the beach and at bars and in restaurants. And when I saw the very first Game Boy black and white, and I saw the mobile phones in Asia starting to have games on them, I thought to myself, this is an amazing thing. I can do the business that I love, and I can be with the people that I love. And that's what inspired me to just leave the console and the traditional games industry and go to mobile when the industry looked like that. Which, you know, had no idea it was going to be as big as it is today, but that's sort of when I started. Another kind of big first step for me was when I was at EA. Jamdat got acquired by EA and became EA Mobile. And when the iPhone first came out, you know, at that point in time, the mobile industry had been around for a long time. There's lots of feature phones, and the iPhone came out for the first time. And a lot of people were like, well, you know, Nokia's dominant. It's going to take a decade for Apple to even chip away at that monster. And we believed that it was going to be the future. It was going to be the next big thing. So we bet most of EA Mobile's resources on the iPhone before it was even successful. And what I love about that screenshot, which is when we were on stage at Apple for the release of the iPad, that big bet worked well for us, but when the iPad came out, we had 5 games available for the iPad. That's a picture of Need for Speed, built by one of our studios at the time in Melbourne, Australia. But the other game that we launched was Command & Conquer, which was built right here in Bucharest by the EA Mobile Romania team, which is pretty cool. I think Dan's here in the audience somewhere, so yeah, he's over there. So it was built here, which is amazing. And so it sort of shows you I've been here in Romania back and forth for many years, and that wouldn't have happened if it had not been for the folks here and Mihai's vision for building up this kind of strength in the country. More first steps. So then, you know, the mobile phone business was doing great. It was sort of dominated by brands. The paid business was there. And then there was kind of the technology change of in-app purchase and the growth of freemium. And when freemium sort of showed up, I looked at that and I thought, okay, this is a business I don't totally understand. I want to learn. I want to take those next steps. So we started to invest and move more of, you know, EA's resources over into freemium. We had some great early successes with Simpsons Tapped Out and Sims Free Play and others. But I still didn't totally understand the business, and I wanted to learn more. And it wasn't just that it was freemium and you could do this kind of IAP model. It was the data-driven design. It was understanding data and analytics as it pertains to your customers and content. And so I thought, well, I can learn this at EA. It'll take a long time, or I can go to where all the experts are. I can go to Zynga and I can learn there. And so I left my wonderful job at EA, and I went over to Zynga to help them build out a mobile division, but primarily to learn this new space and learn from the masters. So I went there and I learned quite a bit. And this whole time that I was moving through EA and through Zynga, I was feeling another shift in the industry, this shift that was sort of commoditized technology and tools that were becoming available to individuals and were moving kind of influence over to the studio teams. And I've always been a studio guy for my entire career, but I could feel this shift happening. And towards my time at Zynga, I started to realize it might be good for me to go to my roots and build a studio and leverage some of these tools and technologies. And what those tools and technologies do is they bring you, the IP holders and the creative folks, closer to your customer. And when I was at EA and Zynga, I was getting farther and farther from the customer, and I felt that just didn't sit right, didn't feel right. And so when starting my own company, Carbonated is basically just about that, about us, the content creators, the IP holders, getting close to customers again. That's ultimately what this is about. We're entertainers, you know, we're paid to provide pleasure for our customers, and ultimately, the closer you can do that, the better off you are. So for me, you can tell I'm an optimist. I'm a big believer the future's getting better. Technology is driving global change, but primarily mobile because of the size and the adoption of all these big companies like Apple and Google. They're driving the technology and global agenda for the most part. I mentioned before, kind of getting close to your customer. I'm going to talk a lot more about that as we go through this talk. And then lastly, I'm an optimist. I don't believe there are the good old days. The good old days weren't that great. Those black and white games, physical CDs, porting of games, it's terrible, right? Today is the best it's ever been, and tomorrow's going to be even better, and I really do deeply believe that, and that's why I keep starting and I keep pushing and I keep taking those next steps because it's just going to get better as we go forward. So if it's so good, let's talk about how good it is today, this kind of golden age of gaming. there's always these kind of big revenue charts. This is, I think, Newzoo and Sensor Tower. They're sort of talking about how big the industry is today. I know we've got a mixed audience that runs from publishing to studio to technologists to artists and designers. But if you don't research this kind of stuff, it's fascinating. The mobile games industry is just a monster, and it's growing. So if you think the business is good today, it's just getting better. And I've been inspired, and we're sitting in a theater today. It's amazing. We're here in a Hollywood infrastructure theater, right? Movies. And just the mobile game segment alone is bigger than all of Hollywood combined. So we don't have to feel like we're the little dogs, we're the big dogs, right? The mobile games industry is just a monster, and it continues to grow. It's growing because everybody on Earth has one of these devices. They're with you all the time, all the stuff that we hear over and over and over again. But more importantly, they allow you as the content creators to talk directly to your customers through this infrastructure. And because you can talk to basically everybody on Earth, there's a diversity in content that you can make as content creators, whether it's, I always call them the black t-shirt games, kind of the Dungeons & Dragons style. We were playing, Lloyd and I, my co-founder, were flying out here yesterday, and we were trying to figure out a game to play on the phone, and we were playing Darkest Dungeon, because it's kind of the kind of games that I love. So you can have those kinds of games, a paid game like Darkest Dungeon you can play without in-app purchase on a plane, or you can have something like our partner Glue makes with Design Home, which is targeted at home builders and sort of those people who like to nest, and as a freemium game with in-app purchase, and there's this whole range. It's all of it's available for you all the time on mobile. It's pretty amazing. Then there's this other idea, which we're going to go into quite a bit here, about few people leveraging a large-scale infrastructure. I love this sort of quote from Jobs where they talk about when his inspiration from Apple was they built these things called blue boxes, right? If you haven't heard this story, where he and Wozniak built these little blue boxes, and they can control billions of dollars of phone company infrastructure with just two kids in a garage and a couple $100. And that reminds me of the games industry today. That's what's happening. It's why it's so good, is that there's all these tools and technologies that you as individuals can wield. You can wield billions of dollars, or in this case, trillions of dollars of infrastructure. I'm a bit of a military brat. My dad was in the Navy, so I grew up around military analogies. So I always like forward observers, this idea that one person can command trillions of dollars of military infrastructure with a microphone and a pair of goggles. This guy's out in the field, he has an idea on what he wants to do, and he can reach out and touch someone, so to speak. So what does this infrastructure look like? Well, we'll do the obvious ones. We're all gamers, so we'll start with the obvious ones. I'll get a little less obvious as we go. But engines, right? I've met John Carmack bunches of times through my career, fortunately. You think about, he spent his entire career, one of the most brilliant technologists I've ever seen, creating engines. And in the beginning, there was just 3 of them, kind of back in the day. And now if you look at id, they're a much bigger team. So if you're a developer and you want to build an engine, it's a daunting task. It's a big, complex, scary task. But you can just simply, with one person, reach out and grab Unity or Unreal, some of the 2D engines like what King uses to Fold or Cocos. And now Amazon's moving into space with their engine. So there's a tremendous amount of infrastructure that you can influence as just 1 or 2 people. And it doesn't just extend there, of course, giving a shout out to the folks here at Amber. Partners from a staffing perspective. If you're a small studio and you need QA, or you need outsourced development, or you need other things, there are partners out there for you. Just pick up the phone and you can call them, and they can give you a level of expertise that would cost you more than you could fund as a small studio team. Our company, we work with Amber, and we work with a lot of other folks as well, but they provide a kind of expertise that we couldn't fund ourselves. It would be too expensive for us to build that kind of expertise. When it comes to technology platforms, Lloyd, who's my CTO, who's sitting over there in the dark, a phenomenal technologist. We have we have no physical hardware in our office whatsoever other than laptops. We're running a big game right now that has huge audience and lots of infrastructure and lots of complexity. We're completely cloud-based. And we built our studio that way because we knew this is the future. Why build all this infrastructure? I remember early in my career, we used to have closets back in our offices filled with these stacks of servers. And today, with a couple of keystrokes, you can spin up hundreds and hundreds of these devices to support you and scale infinitely. If our building was hit by a nuclear bomb, hopefully that doesn't happen, but if it were to happen, we would be able to just open up a laptop and be up and running within 30 minutes anywhere else in the world. It's pretty slick. And this doesn't just extend to kind of the platforms. Game servers, companies like PlayFab or GameLift allow you to scale these businesses globally. When I talk about a global business, it really is a global business. And those folks that are winning today are not just targeting their regional customers. They're looking at global customers all over the world. And you need to have scalable, flexible systems. But you don't have to build them yourselves. You can just go out there, partner with folks who build these systems. They're not that expensive until you have the demand. And if you've got the demand, you've got the money to pay for them. So there's very little risk when you're a small company, getting into these spaces and trying these tools. Most of them are free with no cost to get started. Highly recommend just going out there, taking those first steps, experimenting, and seeing what's out there. Most folks here, I think, are studio folks, but if there's publishing folks here, they have an area of expertise that's amazing, this ability to go out and reach customers. You can be your own Don Draper from Mad Men and go do your own advertising. You know, you hear all these stories that CPI is so expensive and you can't acquire users. That's just not true. It might be true at massive scale for those guys who have the big megaphones, you know, the Supercells and the Machine Zones and the EAs and the Zyngas of the world, who are spending at massive scale. That is a cost problem for them when you're sort of carpet bombing the entire industry. But if you're smaller, you can do this relatively inexpensively. I know lots and lots of teams, we do this all the time ourselves. We'll put acquisition on my personal credit card, $50, $100, $500, and you can go out there and acquire a bunch of users, talk to those users, learn about your product, learn about your ideas. It's really within your reach. They're not these big, complex, overly expensive systems. There's a reason why Facebook's, you know, as powerful a company as they are. They're making all their money on these very performant, good advertising systems. So for those of you who haven't done this, I'm sure lots of you have, but for those of you who haven't, definitely do it. There's other ones out there, AppLove and AdColony and others. But going in there and playing with these tools is pretty amazing. And you don't just have to do it with acquiring users for your shippable product. You can acquire users for concepts. You can acquire users through forums and other ways to test your ideas. And we'll talk more about that as we go. There's a lot of other uses for just Facebook than just acquiring audience for the kind of CPI LTV calculation. There are companies like Playtest Cloud. So now that you've got your audience and you've gathered them, this company was introduced to me at a show like this you know, about a year ago by a guy named Matthias up in Germany. And he said, hey, have you ever used Playtest Cloud to do customer research and test your products? And I was like, no, I've never heard of that. He's like, oh, man, it's awesome. You got to use it. I'm like, all right, I'll give it a shot. And it's amazing. It's basically this system. You put in your APK, you send it off to them. They will get you users all over the world to test your product. You can listen to them play your product and hear them talking about it. You can see where their fingers are tapping. So again, as a content creator, if you want to get close to your customer, this is a great way to get close to your customer. You can test your products. You can test your content. You can hear what they think about it. And it's inexpensive. You know, I spent part of my career at Mattel in my early years, and we used to have to do, you know, play tests with children. And, you know, you have to imagine trying to gather parents and children and get them into a glass conference room like you see in that picture, and sitting them all down and, you know, and having them play your product. It was incredibly, incredibly expensive. And you'd only get people near your town, you know. I was in Los Angeles at the time, and, you know, we'd only get kids in Los Angeles. So you get a very skewed view of what they actually think about your product. And in mobile today, it's a global business. You're not going to be able to get people, you know, from down the street to come look at your title if you're trying to ship it everywhere on Earth. So tools like these, where you can get access to customers all over the planet to check out your title, is really powerful. So highly recommend things like this. You know, we don't know everything, so if you hear about other cool tools, please let us know. We're always doing research at the same time we're talking about what we learn. We also use things like SurveyMonkey and Google Forms. When we do Facebook ads, we'll do things like we'll put out test ads, we'll flow customers into a survey and just ask them, hey, what did you think about this game idea that we had, or what did you think about this concept? And we can test these concepts so that we don't waste 6 months or a year of our lives building something that nobody likes. So highly recommend these kinds of things. Then you get into kind of the deeper, sort of more hardcore stuff. When you start thinking about future trend analysis and sort of outcome prediction, this gets a little outside of my experience. This is something that one of my CTO's favorite topics, so I won't spend too much time on this. But again, this idea that the Google Brain team that created Disbelief, they're kind of internal machine learning systems that they then made available as TensorFlow to the public. These are these other amazing systems and tools that, again, you can use. They're made free and they're available for you to sort of push the limit and push forward. So these are kind of amazing things that are out there today. And then this idea that I don't know what's next. That's why I'm here. I'm here to talk to you, share what I know, and hopefully, you know, people come up to me and they tap me on the show and like, hey, I got this other cool tool. You got to check this thing out. It's amazing. I'm like, oh, awesome, right? This world continues to get better. The tools get better. They're easier to use. They're more powerful. And so I can't wait to see kind of what's going on next year as we move forward. So what do these tools do? Well, talk a little bit about the kind of what I call the stack, right? And you'll see my frame is always customer first. I'm always trying to figure out how to get closer to the customer and understand what the customer wants in terms of the entertainment business that we're all ultimately in. So in the old sort of console business, which I guess is still, monster business today, for those of you who still work in console, I spent much of my career in the console industry. You have this very, very long distance between sort of, being a content team up there at the top with the intellectual property, the people who make the art and the design and the content, whether it's a new IP or whether you're using something like Madden or FIFA or existing brand. You have this old traditional stack of, the content team has to talk to production because they're interfacing with marketing, and marketing's talking to the market. They're listening to customers. They're getting sales information that flows back to the marketing team. Then you have the sales guys who take that and they go out there and they're super important because they're negotiating these huge deals with Target and Walmart and all that stuff. You got to manufacture it, distribute it, and then finally get access to your customers. And that's a really long, slow process. In consoles, it's multiple years, 1 to 2 years in a cycle. And what's happening today with all these tools and technology that's getting commoditized, all those things I sort of brought you through with, using Facebook for user acquisition, and that marketing is getting sort of folded into these groups who know how to use it. Customer service being folded in, something that you can do with one person. Manufacturing, of course, pretty much gone if you're in the digital world. And distribution being global and at scale. What's interesting is as a content team, it moves you closer to the customer. And it was part of the reason, like I said, why I switched and started Carbonated was I was getting farther and farther from the business that I love, farther and farther from entertaining the customers. And with the way the industry is changing and it's getting better, it's allowing content creators to get really close to the customers, to talk to them almost directly. So how does that work? Like, what's an example of what's working out there, and how are companies sort of navigating these waters and in getting close to their customers? So some sort of ideas here. Again, I started way back in the early days. When developers are really kind of composed of engineering is always the foundation of gaming. The guys like John Carmack always used to kick me and remind me of that. Technology is the foundation of gaming, and then the design part that interfaces with the engineering that makes this great entertainment. Those were traditional studios. And then as freemium showed up, you sort of started to have the studio teams do monetization. They started to think about pricing for the first time, which was pretty alien. I was used to sort of, we make the game, we design it, we engineer it, and we hand it off to other people to do all that stuff. But now with freemium, the development teams, they have to have an understanding for pricing and monetization, just as much as they do with engineering and design. And so this idea that it's a separate thing, if you're a freemium studio, it's just not anymore. It's part of your core business. You have to have that from the very beginning. And it's nothing scary. It's no more difficult than doing engineering or design work. It's just a different thing. And then for those companies who do distribution on there, they go direct to the App Store. They're dealing with marketing. They're dealing with distribution globally. And so they have to learn those skills as well. And to think that that's something else. If you're going to do your own distribution, that's not part of your core team. It's simply not true. You need those people with your studio if you're going to be doing those kinds of distribution. And then you have this idea of super studios, what I'm calling super studios. And these aren't necessarily big studios. They're just studios that do all of the things. And so if you're doing engineering, you're doing design, you're doing monetization, now you're doing distribution, you're submitting to the App Store, you're going to be dealing with the customers because you're submitting directly to them, and they're going to be giving you direct feedback in the App Store and writing you emails and saying, hey, I like your game, I don't like your game, you've got a problem. So at that point, if you're doing customer service, you know everything about your customers. You're doing pretty much everything. And if you're talking to your customers directly, you might be uniquely suited to do user acquisition because you know who your customers are. You can probably target like people. And so that's kind of what's changing about the industry today, is that these tools are getting very easy for small teams to wield them. So when I talk about this idea of super studios, I'm not talking about, again, big studios. I'm just talking about the fact that you can do all of these things with a small group. I know a couple folks, I know two-man shops that have done this and have become very successful. And of course, you've got the big companies that do it. So some examples of these. Rocket Games, I think they changed the name to Rocket Speeds when they sold. They sold for like $150 million or something. These were 3 guys from Zynga who left and did this philosophy. They started making some slots games. I think they've got a couple talks online on YouTube. You can check them out. They started small. They started doing UA on their credit cards. They're a really small team. They were inspired. They're aggressive. They're fast. They got to learn their customers. They started to rinse and repeat and got better and better and better. And ultimately, they became successful, and they grew, and they had a wonderful exit. So the idea that a small team can do this is proven. So you can do it if you're a 2 or 3-man shop. You have sort of mid-sized teams. Tamu and the guys up at Next Games sort of started as a studio, and then they moved on to other things. I've met him and speak to him as much as I can, and I love their games. I play Walking Dead No Man's Land and and fascinated by how they're moving as a company. They had an IPO and they went public as a studio, which is pretty amazing. And then of course you got the big guys. I won't talk about Supercell. Everyone knows them, but they're like sort of the iconic big winner of operating in this way. But it's not just the developers. The publishers are changing too. I was at both Zynga and EA in the publishing role, so I know from personal experience how it's changing. It's why I started the company that I did. You have little guys like Flare Games, a great team out in Germany, who are a developer who's shifting to publishing. They understand and can partner with smaller shops because they understand both sides of how this new world is working, how to partner with these kind of multifaceted studios. Zynga, of course, I was there for many years of my career. Zynga is focusing on durable franchises. I put them in the medium category. They're really not medium. They're probably pretty big. They'd probably be insulted that I put it in the medium category, but I kind of didn't have slide space for more than that. But yeah, they're a big company, but they don't do a lot of publishing because they're focusing on these durable live service games. And they've got a couple of those big franchises that run for many years, and they're very close to their customers, and they think a lot this way. And then, of course, EA, traditional console publisher, still doing physical distribution, but also shifting this way in live service mobile, getting close to the customers. One of our co-founders, Colby Launchbaugh, was a creative head of Madden, and he sort of took Madden mobile from a yearly annual game to a live service game, getting rid of the years, keeping it just Madden Mobile that would just run forever. And the idea there was to get that team closer to the customer and not have to refine customers every year. Just keep them all year long. Why throw them away one year and have to get them back the next year? Just keep them there. Keep talking to them, keep that relationship going. And if you've looked at the charts, that game has done extremely well when they change to that type of operation. And you can see they're talking about it today. We've got folks from EA here in the audience. They're player first. They're moving. These are quotes from Andrew. They're moving into the live services business. They're focusing on these durable, long-term businesses. One of our partners, Glue, they're creativity first. They're moving to these kind of mega studio, sort of super studio-like ideas. And what's interesting is both EA and Glue are now headed by product people who understand this shift in the industry. So both CEOs are ex-studio heads and ex-product people. And then you have Tencent, who invests in these durable live service studios like that. Think about League of Legends. It's a one-product company that is close to the customer, that's running these long-term services. That's who Tencent's interested in because they're durable, long-term services. Same with Supercell. They've acquired and invested in those folks for the same reason. And it's not just the traditional games folks. There's all these other kind of people leveraging these tools and technologies. It's so accessible that you're seeing new entrants into this space. One of my favorites is Us2, the guys who did Monument Valley. I'm a big fan of Monument Valley, for those of you who know that game. And they were a design firm. I think they'd done some games, but they sort of entered in this space, leveraging some of these tools and technologies and doing amazing work. And so it sort of shows you this space is open for lots of different types of folks to come in here and make great entertainment, and they've done exceptionally well. Lots of other folks there. Okay. So that's kind of what's working, who's doing it, and kind of how they're doing it, or I guess who's being successful and why. I'll go in a little bit of how they're doing it. Well, at least my perspective on how they're doing it. And we have our own personal frameworks that we use at Carbonated. We'll share those with you today. There's sort of three. First is customer and competition. This idea that when you do research, when you're trying to decide what kind of game to make, and you're thinking, what kind of game should I make? I use a framework of look at the competition because they're testing you and they're showing you what works and what doesn't in the market. It's good data. And then go find customers to look for insight. I'll talk about a framework that we use, kind of a 4 pillars one that I came up with years ago. And then we'll talk about once you're running the live service, if you are close to customers, what are methodologies in which you can engage with those customers on a frequent basis to give yourself a competitive edge. Okay, so research, doing some of this. There's no rocket science to this stuff. It's more a discipline. Going to the charts every day, playing games every day, downloading these games every day. If you find something you're interested in, do the additional level of research. I'm sure everybody here has a free App Annie account. If you're not, go get one. You can learn a lot about these titles by searching the charts, doing a little bit of research, and then play the games yourselves. I can't tell you how many people talk about these games. They've seen them in the charts. They've done their research on App Annie, and then I start asking questions about what happens on level 3, and they're like, yeah, I didn't really play it. And you're like, okay, you did the first 2 steps, but you wouldn't finish the 3rd step and really understand the game. And then, of course, draw your conclusions. We also, in our studio, give people a hard time if we see them playing the same game day after day, week after week, month after month. We're like, look, it's a great game. Do that on your own time. Do research here. Play different games. Tell us insights. Always be learning. Try to figure out what's happening and what's working in the market today. But it's a great frame to use to think about researching through your competitors and what's actually working in the space, because you can see what works and, frankly, what doesn't work. You can learn as much from the games that aren't successful for some reason than the ones that are. So once you've done your sort of research on the sort of quantitative side, then you have to look at the softer side, sort of the qualitative side. And this gets into a lot we were talking about before of using Facebook to acquire customers and funnel them into a forum or a survey so that you can talk to them. You can actually have a personal relationship with these people and say, hey, what did you think about that? I don't know, and so using this idea of forum and ads to merge those together. I have a favorite company, Wattpad. Is anybody familiar with Wattpad? Can I show hands? No? Oh, there's like 2 hands up, 3 hands up. So not many people know Wattpad. Well, I'm fascinated with Wattpad because it's a great example of how the content in our world is becoming atomized. It's getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and all these bits of content are having touch points with customers. And so Wattpad is this idea that writers can write books or novels 1 sentence at a time. And as you write the sentence, almost like posting on Facebook or something, they write a sentence and they say submit, and then the customer can be like, oh, that's awesome. What's going to happen in the next sentence? And they can write a paragraph and they go, oh, that's awesome. What's going to happen next? And the writer's getting real-time feedback as they're writing paragraph after paragraph. It's a lot like games where you put out content every week or every month, and customers say, oh, that's awesome. What happens next, right? So they're very similar in a way, but that's a very light way of testing. And we've done some interesting experiments using Wattpad to test out ideas and concepts. But the idea that those systems exist for writers, it's similar to what's existing today for freemium live service mobile games, where you can put out content, you can listen to your customers, and you can rinse and repeat. It's a massive advantage over the people who do this on a 2-year cycle or a 1-year cycle. You can get so much more information than you can than if you wait a year or 2 to get it down the road. And again, at the end, draw your own conclusions, be inspired, do great things based on the information that you get from your research. All right, what to build? Apparently I'm running over, so crazy. I'll try to go faster. What to build? This is a framework that I use when we look at these games in the business in kind of 4 blocks. We look at them at appeal, mechanic, retention, and monetization. It's a frame that I use to help me navigate the ecosystem. So on the appeal side of things, this is everything that happens before somebody downloads a game. It's essentially the free charts, right? So if you're trying to figure out how to the brand or the look and feel of your title, there's a great way to look at this. Look at the top free charts. Keep this as almost a separate bucket. You'll see games like Candy Crush or Match 3 games, Puzzles and Dragons versus Candy Crush. They're both sort of similar mechanics in some ways, loosely, but very, very different appeal, very, very different skins on top. And so this appeal bucket is something that you can get good at, and you can look at and you can do research on sort of what's appealing to players on the install side of things. I won't go into the mechanics side of things. This is a vast and complex business for those of us who are game designers, but there's this idea of the mechanics, what you do with your finger. Now that you've downloaded the game, how you actually play it. What do you do with this game? Tapping with your finger and doing those things. These top 2, appeal and mechanic, is kind of the traditional games business, the paid business. On the free business, since the first time download is free, you have to get them to come back at least once because you won't make any money the first time. The game's free. So when people ask me, what's the most important mechanic or, metric that you track in the freemium game business, it's retention for sure, right? Because if you don't get them to come back at all, you'll never make any money and you're going to go out of business. So retention is the most important thing in freemium game development. And retention is driven by content mastery, the idea that people are coming back to play your content and get good at it and keep getting new content. So if you have good content mastery in your game, you're going to have good retention. There's lots of ways of doing that, but that's ultimately what drives retention, is content mastery. And then now that you've got retention, you have the potential to monetize, and you may be able to monetize if you can retain users. So if you retain users, you can get into the monetization thing, and there's a ton of stuff to do there. The businesses that we run use all of them. IAP offer all to ads and subscriptions. So lots and lots of variability and lots of cool ways to monetize. So at the end of the day, if you think about this kind of framework, appeal is represented by downloads, mechanic by star rating, retention by, well, retention. It's hard to see in the market retention because most people don't share those numbers. But given retention maps to monetization, all the top grossing games by definition have good retention. It's also why the charts don't move very much. I always hear this like, oh man, the top grossing charts don't move. It's because they retain really well, because you can't make money unless you retain. So that's why they don't move. They're highly, highly retaining games, which gives them the leverage to monetize. Okay, cool. So now that you've kind of got an idea to make your game, you've got your framework, and you're starting to design it, and you get it out there and you ship the thing, if you believe you got to be close to customers, how do you manage being close to customers? How do you do that? After that stack is gone, remember that original stack that I had of the slide, and it sort of collapsed down, and now you've got the studio really close to the customers, right? It's not just up to some CS guy to sort of deal with the customers. All of us at our studio deal with the customers directly. Our PM does, our designers do, I do, engineering, QA, we all talk directly to customers. And it might seem kind of messy, but there's actually a lot of interesting ways in which you can talk directly to your customers. The standard sort of common org is to have the data kind of flow into your PM, and then it sort of makes its way through the various teams, and there's kind of siloed groups of, the artists are over there on the art team, the QA guys are on the QA side, the engineers are kind of over there, and the information sort of flows slowly around. But we don't really believe that it should work that way. And we're inspired by companies like SpaceX and Tesla. And there's this great kind of email that came out, I think, like 3 days ago. I can tell you how fast we built this presentation. But this was an email that came out to him. And essentially what he's saying here is, we don't like fiefdoms. We don't like slow communications. And if you do that kind of slow communication here, you're not going to have a job here anymore. And we believe in that same kind of fluid communication, particularly in entertainment, as it pertains to our customers. So for Tesla, they have other reasons why they do that, but for us, it's really about getting customer inside information to everybody on the team as fluidly as we can. So we do it something like this. We have data, or do, what the players do, flowing into that group, and then we have the comms, or what the players are saying, going in a different group, and everyone sort of talks to each other. So what we have the customers being exposed to everybody on the team. Talking a little bit about the data that flows in. I'm a data guy. I love data. It's sort of my place to play as much as I like the customer side of things. I love the data side of things. They've got all these kind of terms in there. And ultimately, you need these tools to be able to manage these large audiences, understand them all. But I've had experience, myself personally and others, I had a PM come up to me one day and say that our customers are essentially rocks with arms. And it was a little disappointing to see that, because they sort of lost touch with the fact that these are people. These numbers represent masses of actual humans and people that love your game and experience it. And they sort of had lost touch with this, and it became sort of fuzzy to them, and they were using terms, numbers, to represent these humans on the other side of your game. I put this 50,000 DAU number up here. Have any of you guys ever managed a game of that size, 50,000 DAU or up? Yeah, there's a bunch of hands go up, right? And 50,000 DAU probably in the mobile games or traditional games industry wouldn't feel that big. You'd sort of feel like, I know a lot of the bigger companies would shut games down like that. Which is disappointing, because 50,000 looks something like that. It's a really, really large group of people. And so when you think about 50,000 DAU, that's every day. Imagine being on stage. I'm nervous standing in front of everybody here. Imagine being Kenny Chesney and standing up in front of 50,000 people like that, cheering and loving your product. That's the business that we're in. And so when you see these numbers, sort of these rocks with arms that you hear, they're real people. And when you have an audience of 10,000 or 15,000 DAU, it's massive. It's a staggering number of people. So never forget that these numbers are real people, but you still need to use data to get that information. So nothing wrong with the data or what the players do, but always remember that you're an entertainer. Ultimately, those numbers are people. But then you get into the human side of things, the say, right? So it's easy to use data because you can sit in front of your computer and pull all that data, but you got to go do the say. You got to go talk to people. So we do it 2 ways in our studio. We actually set up a separate Slack channel. We have our customers sign NDAs, and we bring a whole bunch of our customers into a Slack channel. And everybody on our team goes into that Slack channel and talks directly with our customers. So we'll do things like, our artist, she makes something new, she'll design something, and she'll put it into the Slack channel with our customers. Hey, what do you think about this, right? And they're like, oh, that looks sick. That's amazing, right? You're not going to get a metric number that says, that's sick, right? There's no metric that says that's sick. But if you talk to your customers, they'll say that. They'll be like, oh, that's amazing, or that's so cool, or if they're talking about a color, they'll use the kind of language that'll help you understand that color. So things like Slack, getting that human interaction is really important. And of course, we partner with customer service as well, and they give us a lot of sort of phone and forum information, which is also really helpful. We also don't do it just that way. We do live streams. We leverage these big infrastructures. It sort of ties together, but we'll leverage things like Twitch, but in the guise of getting closer to our customers and talking to our players. So in this picture, you can see we have a little tiny green room set up. We literally painted it. It cost us a couple $100. I went and got some green paint from Home Depot and little camera and lit it all up. It was pretty easy to do, and leveraged the free service of Twitch to put this up. And in the other screenshot, you can see our community manager sitting with our artist, the same person I told you who, when she was putting the art into the Slack channel. Here you can see she's actually sitting in front of customers live, and they're chatting with her, and she's talking to them live, and they're going back and forth. They're talking about the kind of content that was released before and the kind of content that's coming up next, and getting really detailed feedback about what will work. And this is a massive competitive advantage that you have in this industry today, and why this industry is so much better today than it ever was, that you can have this fast interaction with your customers. It's amazing. So this is as we talk about customers, we get a lot of player reviews. This one was from just a week or so ago. Sort of shows you how fast we're getting reviews. And what I love about this particular review, it's sort of eloquently written in the sense that he talks about that he sees that we're working hard. He understands what we're doing. He's also giving us a suggestion in the second line. And when we read that suggestion, that's smart, and we're actually going to do that. We said, hey, that's a really good idea. We're actually going to do that. He watches the live stream. He's a customer who sees our live stream and comes out there and sees what we're doing. So I love that this quote sort of all came together. And it's people like Slapnuts316 who wrote this to us and sent this to us. And I always chuckle at that because this is the industry that we're in. And if it wasn't for people like these, we wouldn't be in business. And so we're always thankful for folks like these to engage with us and to talk with us as we go along. So in conclusion, stay close to your customer. It's the core of this business. Ultimately, we're all entertainers. So customers are everything. Keep on learning. Keep on trying these new tools. And again, I'm an optimist, but there's no better time than now. And I really, really mean that. This is the best it's ever been, and it's just going to keep getting better. Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody.